Hello, friends, and welcome to episode number 53 of Nostalgia Talk, and also the first one of 2023. I'm James, you know me, and I think I'm going to do a pretty good job today because joining me is the one and only, the very talented and very funny, and also one of my mentors, Stephanie D'Abruzzo.
Hi, James. How you doing?
I am well. How are your holidays?
They were lovely.
Mhm.
Low key, it was great.
Same
Yeah.
here. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Stephanie is a puppeteer, actress, voice actress whose work has been seen on television and even on stage as well. For a long time, she's been on Sesame Street doing Elizabeth, Curly Bear, Googel for Monster Clubhouse, Lulu, and is currently the performer of Prairie Dawn, and has been on Donkey Hodie, Oobi, what else? Jack's Big Music Show, Nature Cat, and on stage in Avenue Q. Um, did you win an award for Avenue Q?
I got nominated for a Tony and a Drama Desk during the Vineyard run, and then the ensemble won the Outer Critics Circle Award. They won a special Outer Critics Circle Award for ensemble performance.
Okay, so Tony nominated. I want to make sure I had my
Yeah,
facts right.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm. So it's great to have you here for the first show of the year.
Thank you. Happy
Mm-hmm.
New Year to everyone.
Mm-hmm. So let's begin with what inspired you to want to get into acting, and what kind of acting were you more interested in? Were you more interested in being on stage or screen, or like was puppeteering always a part of it?
I just always loved performing in any way. I loved singing growing up. I would sing anywhere, just swinging on my swing set or singing along to Sesame Street records in my bedroom. I loved singing in chorus in elementary school and in choir in high school and middle school. Um, and I loved performing characters, just doing any kind of acting that there was to do, even in grade school, reading little plays out of the reading books. And I was a very good reader thanks to Sesame Street and the Electric Company. I was reading at age 3, and so they always made me the narrator, which I didn't like because I wanted to play a character. I couldn't, and I didn't have the presence of mind to be able to voice that, but I just knew that being the narrator seemed boring. It had the most lines, but it was just, and I couldn't appreciate the storytelling elements when I was 8. But I wanted to play a character. I wanted to do something different. And I did a lot of theater when I was in high school. I was really lucky where I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Um, we had a great theater department at my high school. We did multiple shows a year. And so I had the chance to play little background chorus roles and supporting roles and leading roles throughout the 4 years I was there. And I just loved performing in any way, shape, or form. And then I did a lot of student films when I was in college. I decided
Mhm.
not to be a theater major. I was a radio, TV, film production major, but I, you know, could perform, could act, and my friends needed actors for their films, and all the theater majors were always too busy to do them. And because I'd been on both sides of the camera, I knew things about film that the theater majors didn't. I knew about continuity and I knew about acting smaller for the screen. So I did a lot of student film. I would just perform anything anyone asked me to do. I did girls' barbershop quartet singing in high school and vocal jazz ensemble and, uh, you know, doing any little thing that, improv, anything that my friends came up with. And puppetry was really not something that was on my radar until I was in college. I was always a Muppet fan as a
Mm.
kid, a big Sesame Street and Muppet fan. But then when I was in high school, middle school and high school, it wasn't really cool to watch the Muppets. I would see Sesame Street if I was babysitting, but
Mhm.
I really wasn't watching it with the same fervor that I was when I was younger. But then when I got to college, you turn on Sesame Street as, for fun between classes. It's a security blanket and
Yeah,
renting.
who cares about
Yeah,
the haters?
yeah, and renting, and this is before the internet, so you really didn't know who the haters were. They had to be right up in front of your face back then. And renting tapes of Muppet movies and what have you. And I was able to look at those Muppet performances with different perspective, through fresh eyes, and seeing it more from a performer's perspective than a fan perspective. And that's when I saw, oh, wait a minute. that guy who's playing Ernie, he is also Rolf, and he's also Kermit, and he's also the Swedish Chef, and that guy who plays Bert is also Animal and Fozzie and Miss Piggy, and seeing the
Which a
possibility.
lot of people still can't believe that Miss Piggy is played by a guy.
Yes, I remember in fourth grade, a friend of mine, still a good friend of mine, Greg Burdick, coming in. There was a magazine in the 70s called Dynamite Magazine. It
Hmm.
was fantastic, and it was a magazine all about, basically pop culture, but aimed at kids. And he came in waving a copy of Dynamite Magazine because there was a big article about the Muppet movie or the Muppet Show. I don't remember whether it was the Muppet Show or the Muppet movie. He said, "You'll never guess, Miss Piggy is played by a guy, and his name is Frank Oz." And all our little minds were just blown.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, this world of not just being able to play multiple characters, but to be able to play so many different kinds of characters. And the bonus for me is, it didn't matter what I looked like. I tried to do some theater in college, but there's such a thing you learn as being typed out, which means if you're the wrong height, weight, age, size, shape, you automatically, no matter what your abilities are, you are not considered for that role. And
Ouch.
well, that's the world, baby. That's
Yeah.
the world. And with puppetry, none of that mattered.
Hmm.
And so it really it appealed to my fresh improv skills. I loved doing character voices. I loved singing. I loved writing, but I didn't want to be a writer. I loved directing, but I didn't want to be a director. And puppetry just embodied all of these things that I was really loving to do at that time. So yeah, um, I built crappy looking puppets and taught myself TV puppetry because I wanted to work for the Muppets. I didn't want to do birthday parties. I didn't want to do my own projects because I wasn't going to learn anything from myself. I wanted to learn from the best. I wanted to be where the best puppetry was and the best characters were and the best comedy was. So
Hmm.
I put all my eggs into this one tiny basket, which looking back might not have been the wisest thing to do, but in some ways I feel like when I realized I wanted to be a Muppet performer, it just felt like it was something that had been carved out for my specific meanness. I can't describe it any other way. And so I've just been lucky, really, really lucky to get there and work with the people that I've worked with. But more than that, to do things that I didn't think I'd be able to do kinds of characters that surprise me.
Hmm.
I'm still finding new characters in me, so that's always fun.
Nice. When you got to Sesame Street, was there any puppeteer that you kind of like looked up to the most, like who taught you the most?
I think I learned a little from everyone. No one really took me under their wing per se. The closest person who I think might have guided me during my early days was Camille Banara.
Hmm.
She was sort of on her way out. She married the president of American Standard Plumbing Company. She became a CEO wife and was easing out of performing. But she was still at Sesame when I was there. And she razzed me my very first day a little bit. I memorized my lines and, oh, we don't memorize here. And
Yeah, you just improvise.
well, no, actually we don't. We paste up the scripts to the sides of the
Hmm.
monitors. I'm sure you've seen pictures of that behind the scenes video and photos. But she made fun of me for that, and in a fun way, and sort of guided me a little bit. I obviously didn't get to work with her all the time, but along the way, everybody, you just learn things from everybody, and you learn a lot by watching. Um, it was really encouraged that in the early days we come and watch even when we weren't scheduled to be there. And in the early days, I was not getting a lot of work. I was not scheduled to be there very much. So if I wasn't working, I had permission to come and see what was going on and watch the way the other puppeteers worked. And I mean, I can honestly say I've learned from every single puppeteer on the show. Very different things from everyone.
Mm. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Not
Mm.
just how to puppeteer, but how to navigate things, how to navigate your body position, what to say and what not to say. Yeah, how to advocate for a character, how to advocate for yourself. It took me a really long time to feel like I had any autonomy to come out from under the shadows. It took me a long time to be able to advocate for a character, to make suggestions, not just for maybe a tweak of a line, but maybe how to rig a prop or how to do something complicated, you know. But eventually, it took time, but eventually, you know, with the support of everyone around me, you get to that place.
Do you remember the first ever puppet that you did for Sesame Street?
Oh yes, it was well. Okay, the first puppet that I ever did a voice for was Monster Number 3, in an episode where Big Bird had a flute and he was parading around Sesame Street, and I was one of 4 monsters who was ordering salad at Hooper's. But Gina heard the flute, and it was like the Pied Piper. Gina heard the flute and was swept away by the music and didn't get to serve the monsters. So my first line was, I want salad.
Sadly, those poor monsters never got their salad.
They never got their salad. But I did work on the 25th anniversary home video special. So I had my hands in a bunch of different puppets in the background at one point. But Monster Number 3 was the first one I got to voice. In November of 1993. It's going to be 30 years.
I was just about to say that, but I didn't want to make you feel old.
Oh, I already feel old. There's not much you could say. I know I'm old. It's okay.
I'd be lying if I said I never heard that from my guest before. So,
and speaking of nostalgia talk.
Hey, I'm going to be 24 in a couple of months. So.
Oh, well, yeah, please, if you don't make it by the time you're 25, Orson Welles will have just, you know, zoomed by you, blown your doors off. It's okay. That's the one thing I remember as a film major in college, and everybody talking about, oh, well, I have till 25. No, you don't. You've got all the time in the world. Don't let Orson Welles or any other wunderkind or, you know, the Biebers and the Swifts and the youngins and the JoJo Siwas and all of the young YouTubers coming up make you feel like you have to. It's not a race. It's not a race. You have to figure out who you are and what you want to do. And you know, you are working with people on set who've been doing it for decades, and a lot of them didn't set out to do that. And that's the best part about working, you know, with on a set with people in different departments and getting to know them, is you learn, oh, that camera guy, he was in the Navy for 15 years before he ever did camera work.
Yeah, we actually had a scenic guy who was in aviation. Yeah,
there you go. You know, that guy worked in advertising. That guy in that department did something totally different. That guy drove a truck. That woman was a teacher. You know, there's so many ways to get into the business, and there are so many different pathways that people take, and they're all legitimate, and everything you learn can be used in the industry in one way or the other. And if you know, showbiz, as it were, is about storytelling, and we're telling the stories of the human experience. Well, if you only have the perspective of somebody who's studied just one thing in your life, you're not going to be able to tell very rich stories. So having had a life before it and having done many things leading up to the thing that you ultimately want to do, it's never a bad thing.
Absolutely.
You'll draw from all of your experiences, no matter what you do. I guarantee it.
Thank you. So, as time went on, you did a couple of one-off characters on Sesame Street here and there, and as I was researching for this, I noticed that I think your first ever recurring character, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, was it Elizabeth?
It was Elizabeth. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and that was a mistake. Well, it was an accident. I don't want to say it was a mistake. It was kind of an accident.
Well, for any of the listeners who don't remember this Elizabeth character, Elizabeth was around when I was a kid, but there was one episode where this little boy named Jerome moves to Sesame Street and is a little bit upset by it. It's like, oh, it's nothing like where I used to live, because, you know, now I can't show all this to my best friend Elizabeth, but she's gonna come and visit. He would bring that up every chance that he would get. And then at the end of the episode, she pays him a visit, and then we see more of Elizabeth, and Jerome was never seen again. I guess they ended up not moving to Sesame Street.
I guess there are characters like that all the time who, come to move to Sesame Street and then we never see or hear of them ever again.
Mhm.
Now, Elizabeth showed up on the last page of that script, and I think she only had 2 lines, and the parenthetical after her first line was loud. It just said
Mm.
Elizabeth, parentheses, loud. Hey, Jerome, I'm here. We're visiting. And when I saw what the puppet looked like, I thought about what vocally I wanted to do, but of course you get to the set. If the voice that you've thought about doesn't look like it's organically going to come out of that puppet, then it doesn't work. But seeing that little blunt redhead, blunt bang cut, blunt pigtailed redhead girl with the little parochial school uniform, it was just perfect.
Mm.
And yeah, so when they needed an anything Muppet for subsequent episodes, sometimes they would plug in Elizabeth to that. It
Mm.
wasn't necessarily written for her, but back in the day, there were a lot of instances where you'd have anything Muppet #1 there was a tongue twister contest that Telly was in, so Elizabeth showed up in that. There was an episode where I think kids were at a tea party, and Elizabeth showed up in that. So
Mm.
just turned into recurring, and I was very lucky.
Mm. I think my favorite Elizabeth episode was where they were building the boat.
Ah, yes, that was a good one. That was fun.
The
That was with the Roscoe.
mm.
Yeah, we
And
always have a good
and
time.
Oscar, of course, tried to mess it up by pranking everyone. It's funny. I recently just did a little video tribute to Bob McGrath,
Oh, okay.
and I realized that before Telly came around, Oscar liked to screw with Bob the most.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so Oscar wasn't really much of a grouch. He was really just more of a negative trickster back in the early days.
He was a little of everything.
Yeah.
He just liked to stir the pot.
Mm.
He stirred the pot.
So
Yeah.
for characters like Elizabeth and Lulu and Google, Curly Bear, did you
All
have
these
to
characters are at least 20 years old. You do know this, right? I mean,
they were around when I was watching the
that
show.
first Elizabeth episode, I believe, is like 1997.
Yep. These characters were around when I was a kid, so
But that's before you were born.
I don't think Monster Clubhouse was.
No, not Monster Clubhouse, but that
Right,
first
yeah.
Elizabeth episode.
Yeah, but I saw so much of Elizabeth after that. The episode that introduces Elizabeth, I have watched that before. It's on YouTube, so
Ah, gotcha.
and it's one of
Yes.
my very favorites.
Oh, that's very nice.
Because it reminds me of the street I used to live on in Waverly. That's where I met my best friend,
Oh,
who of course lives in another country, but her family lives on that street, so that's how we met. And
gotcha.
just like Elizabeth, she has a thing for cats
Oh,
too.
ah, there you go.
She's
Oh,
of
that's
course
very
got
nice.
more than one.
Well, sure, sure.
Crazy cat lady. So
No,
for
no. You're allowed to have more than one cat. It doesn't make you a crazy cat lady.
I make fun of her for it all the time. So
Okay.
so for Elizabeth, Lulu, Google, Curly
Mhm.
Bear, did you have to audition for them, or were you just kind of handpicked to do them?
Um, Lulu came from I think some of the writers were thinking of what they could do with me. So Mo Willems wrote the first Lulu script
Okay.
where the monsters, this was before Monster Clubhouse. This was a group of monsters that had a clubhouse, very different,
Right.
who went on a field trip. So he wrote this character, Lulu, with me in mind. And yes, when I say Mo Willems, I mean the Mo Willems,
Yes,
the
the
Dr.
guy who
Seuss for the new generation.
yeah, the guy who always tells everyone don't let the pigeon drive the bus.
That's right. That's right. Uh, I was very lucky to get to work with Mo, not just on Sesame Street, but on an animated show he did for Cartoon Network at the turn of the century called Sheep in the Big City. It's very difficult to find, but boy, did I have a good time working on that.
Mm.
And yeah,
Mhm.
he's a superstar.
Mhm.
Anyway, so that's how Lulu came about. And, similarly, I think they were just testing out that character. And then she got plugged into a couple of shows, and infamously changed her appearance from one season to another, and then went away, as
Mhm.
characters do. Google with Monster Clubhouse, I think they just knew they wanted uh, Johnny and me and Kevin and Joey. Well, no, the first time around, sorry, it was me and Alice and Joey and Kevin. And then Alice left Sesame, and so then it became Johnny T took her character. So I think it was just, oh, these four monsters, we're just gonna have these people. Curly Bear, Curly Bear came about. Um, so Alice Deneen was one of the many puppeteers who took on Mama Bear at one point or another.
Right.
I, at one point, then did Mama Bear briefly after she left, and
Oh,
then
wow.
right before, like 2 episodes.
Okay.
And then when Curly Bear was going to happen and Jen Barnhart was coming into Sesame Street, Kevin had us both audition for Mama Bear. And I think that, we both think like, look, Jen was meant to do Mama Bear, and I had no problem with that. And we both did this audition. We both right-handed for each other in this audition. Barnhart and I were great friends. We love each other. And I remember saying to Kevin, because Kevin Clash was the puppet captain, and
Mhm.
the way things work at Sesame is if it comes to small one-off characters, you don't audition for each of those characters. He knows what people can do, and if it's a butterfly or a teapot or a this or a that, he'll just say, okay, this is Joey, this is Stephanie, this is Fran, this is Leslie, this is blah blah blah. I said, all things being equal, I'd love to play the little baby, and
Mm.
so that's kind of how that happened. Barnhart played Mama, and I got to do Curly. So, and
Mm.
again, not knowing anything about what would happen or not happen with Curly, but yeah,
Yeah,
that's
because
kind of how that came to be.
another good friend of this podcast is actually Lou Berger, and
Oh,
he
Lou.
hi Lou if you're listening.
Hi, Lou.
And he was talking a little bit about the introduction of Curly Bear because that was when he was the head writer,
Oh, yes,
and
yes.
he really really liked the idea because when he had Baby Bear and Goldilocks in mind, he said it was kind of like a sibling rivalry.
Yeah.
And finally, Baby Bear gets a big sister, and one of the
Little
producers is
sister.
like, sorry, I
That's
messed that
okay.
up. Yeah. Finally, Baby Bear gets a sister, and one of the producers is like, the story's the three bears: Papa Bear, Mama Bear, Baby Bear. That why do they need another one? Lou's like, because it's interesting.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, Lou's good about you know, well, let's go where the comedy is.
Yep, that's Lou
Let's
for
try
you.
to find where the comedy is, and comedy is a very, very good thing. Yeah, I wasn't privy to any of that. I just knew they were doing so. I didn't know what the puppet was going to even look like until my very first day on set.
Mm,
I thought she'd be smaller than she was.
mm,
um, yeah, Curly Bear wound up being a bit of a challenge in some ways because eventually, in the very early days when she was just a baby, that's easy. You're just doing babble babble baby talk.
mm,
And then once she could be mobile, she was no longer confined to a car seat or being
mhm.
held, um, there was a bit of an inconsistency from script to script as to how verbal she was.
Yeah.
Some scripts had her being, babble babble. Some had her speaking, in stilted, small vocabulary, uh, you know, 2-word sentences, what have you. And then sometimes I'd see a script where it would say all the bears, and they'd have to be saying this really complicated thing, and
Mm.
including Curly. So I had to try to navigate that as best I could.
Oh,
There was
that's interesting.
there was one episode I remember specifically where the bears were trying to hibernate, and so they had all the bears counting, trying to count sheep. So they're counting, and they're counting like 2000 blah 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 64, right? They're counting these really high numbers.
Yeah.
And Curly was, I think she was sort of in the foreground. And so I just, as they're counting these really high numbers, I just had her say two, 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 because in my mind she could only count to two. That
Mm,
made
fair
sense for
enough.
me,
Yeah.
and they let me do that. Um, And, because what was I going to do? There's
Fair enough.
she's a baby. And it wasn't something where I felt like I could summon the powers that be and say, what is everybody's thoughts on this? Because she really didn't appear that often. And I knew that she wasn't very regular. So I just tried to, one of the challenges of performing is you work with what you're given and you do the best you can with what you have. And I always love, getting to work with David Rudman, as I get to do on many things. And so I was just happy to have the opportunity. So anything that I could do to be true to the character and still try to keep her alive and engaged with David, I did the best I could. But characters fall by the wayside all the time, and you're naming all my dead ones.
Fair enough.
I'm proud of my dead characters. I mean,
No,
the
they've
fact
had
that
they've had quite the legacy for fans.
well, that's what I'm always surprised by, because it's only been recently that I'm starting to hear about those characters, and it's because people who grew up with them, like you did, are now in their early 20s and looking back at it with nostalgia, and I'm shocked by that because I didn't think that they were on enough to make that big of an impact. So it's always nice to hear that they were appreciated in their short little lives. I loved playing all of them. I really did.
I think with Curly Bear, one thing that really impressed me, because you were talking about how she was only able to count to 2, but she was strong enough to push Baby Bear off of a chair.
Oh gosh, I forgot about that.
Yeah, that
I
episode
forgot
where
about
they're kind of
Well, she is a bear. I mean, she's a bear.
good point, but at the
Bears
same
are
time,
gonna have strength. What I loved about Curly is because she didn't talk a whole lot. That's when I could really make use of a deadpan silent take. And I loved being able to take advantage of that or to play with her eyelids. The only reason she had moving eyelids is because very early on she had to fall asleep and her eyes had to close in real time. So Jim Krupa, I believe, built that mechanism. And over time it's a cable mechanism. So they don't, if you're not using them a lot, they do tend to wear down. So I think by the time she had her last appearance, it was barely working, but I got it to work enough to be able to do a good deadpan take, because I think that's where I was able to find her comedy. Was in just the not, it's always fun to play a character that doesn't understand.
right.
And is just trying to take it all in, because all this ridiculousness is happening around her.
True that.
Yeah.
So eventually you got one of the biggest characters on Sesame Street that you currently do now, which would be Prairie Dawn, after another friend of this podcast, Fran Brill,
Yeah.
retired.
Mhm.
How did you get that character?
Well, I auditioned for Prairie,
Okay.
and Fran was at that audition, and I guess I did it well,
Mm,
because that's how that happened.
mm,
Yeah, I love Prairie. I
mm.
really do.
Yeah, Fran always puts it best when she says that at first Prairie was meant to be like this little girl, it's like typical
Mhm.
little girl, and then as the years went by, she became more kind of bossy and
Yeah.
demanding of the other characters.
Well, and that's the thing. I remember thinking, okay, I'm auditioning for Prairie, do you want old Prairie or do you want current Prairie? Because there's the old Prairie, in the 70s when she was still a little girl, oh mercy, I am afraid I do not know. I mean, that's a very different Prairie than, get out of my chair, I'm gonna fire you. No, it's very different. What Fran was able to do and evolve with the character is just wonderful. I have a good time on the occasions that Prairie gets to come out and play.
Yeah, I've noticed that Prairie's appeared quite a lot in recent years, like with the Oranges and the New Snack skit, which
Hmm.
I thought was really funny.
Yes, that was fun.
There was that episode where her and Gabrielle were trying
Yeah,
different hairstyles.
yes, that was fun. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, she'll show up once in a while. I'm still hanging in there.
Hmm.
I
Do
haven't
you,
I haven't killed her yet.
do you have any favorite characters that you've done on Sesame Street just one time and one time only?
Well, I don't know if this counts as one time, but I loved playing that pink jacket in Elmo's world. And
Oh
that pink
yeah.
jacket did get to come back in 2 episodes as Zoe's jacket come to life. So, I mean, well, and then there was so the one time only. Let's see. I mean, I'd really have to. I played a tomato a couple of seasons ago. I played many tomatoes, but this particular tomato, um, I enjoyed very much because it gave an impassioned speech about we have seeds. Seeds. I'm a fruit. You might think I'm a vegetable, but that monologue was trimmed. But I remember I did get to say to Alan, "Thank you for loving me." I love getting to play a tomato. I just played an old man saying, "Hush, you squirrels." That made me happy. That's all I said. And the only reason I got to play that character is because it was a very narrow opening in the puppet Tyler Bunch was supposed to play. That little old man, and he couldn't fit his hand into the puppet. And because I had smaller hands, I was one of the few people who could actually fit in. Um, there are stranger ways to get a role.
Mm.
So just love playing the puppet just looked so great. I'm sure there have been many, many others that I can't think of at this point. I've played so many characters just once,
Hmm.
and I love coming in and just doing something different every time. I'm sure. Oh, I loved playing that little duckling in the Super Grover 2.0 sketch where she's trying to get across a stream to get to a party on the other side.
Hmm. Oh yeah, I
She
remember
doesn't
that.
want to mess up her party shoes. And she had these cute little webbed Mary Jane shoes and little ruffled socks and a little string of pearls. And oh, yeah, that little duck was adorable.
Mm.
I really enjoyed playing that little duck.
Mm. I think that jacket that you brought up might be one of my favorites that you've done because
Thank
I
was.
love that moment in the Elmo's World skit where it's just so funny when because usually Elmo's subjects are on inanimate objects, just the most random of inanimate
Oh yeah.
objects. Like it
Mm-hmm.
could be like I'm not very good at Elmo's voice. It honestly sounds really, really scratchy, but he
Okay.
would be like, today in Elmo's world, I can just hear it
Yeah.
coming into my headphone. That's so bad.
Okay.
Today
Everybody
on
has. I don't do the best Elmo either. It's okay.
it's a hard one. Today on Elmo's World, we're going to talk about my very favorite one ever was food.
Oh sure.
We're going to talk about food,
Mm-hmm.
and but with the jackets, like when the jacket comes in to talk to Elmo about life being a jacket, like
Yeah.
finally it's time for the jacket to take off, and Elmo's like, "Thank you for coming." The jacket asks Elmo for a hug.
Yeah. Well, that was in the
Yeah.
script. That was in the
Okay.
script. But yeah, it was adorable. That was, I think, my second Elmo's World. That was a first season Elmo's World. That
Hmm.
was a really early Elmo's World. We were still figuring that whole format out. Um, so it was fun to get
I
to do
bet.
that.
Do you have any celebrity stories from Sesame Street?
I'm sure I have many celebrity stories from Sesame Street, but
Okay,
there are too many to tell. I
fair
mean,
enough.
there have been really lovely people who have come to the show.
Hmm.
Um, and some of them I've just, acted like a fool because I was so awestruck and starstruck by. And some of them have just been such lovely, down to earth people. And I don't want to call anybody out by name because I don't want to make it seem like the others weren't great.
Fair
Uh,
enough. Yeah.
but
Mm.
we've had amazing, amazing people come onto the show, and I can't believe I've literally worked at the feet of legends.
Mm. I was just thinking about a celebrity that you worked with on the topic of one-off characters when you were in the home video Elmo's Magic Cookbook with Emeril Lagasse.
Ah, Emerald was a sweetheart. He signed. I asked him if he would sign a spatula for me and my husband, and he did. It was really more of a pancake flipper, but I still have that hanging in our kitchen.
Oh my God, that's so cool.
Emerald was a sweetheart. Emerald was very, and he wasn't used to doing that kind of performing with puppets, but he was game. He was a trooper. It was great. That was fun to do.
Mm,
Yeah, Jean the Genie, that was a one-off. Gosh, I can't believe I almost forgot about that. She was
mm,
fun too.
mm.
It just I had to be in blue screen all the time. I had to be, and back in that time, I mean, I had to be in the full tight blue screen suit. Nowadays, you have a little more leeway with you can wear it a little more loose fitting. They can deal with wrinkles a little bit better. But back then, man, you had to have the skin tight bodysuit and the really close fit hood. Um, Very hard to see, very hard to puppeteer in. That's what I remember most about doing Gene the Genie.
Mm. Talking about celebrities, actually, this isn't really a Sesame Street related question, but you also did Julie's Green Room on
I sure
Netflix.
did. Yes,
What was
yes.
Julie Andrews like?
She's wonderful and lovely and saucy and spicy and has stories. And I mean, she's a legend. And I think if you've ever seen an interview with her, she's exactly who she is. She's not the characters that she plays, but she's a great lady who doesn't mince words and doesn't suffer fools and has had an amazing career. And yeah, she's that was really special to get to work again, working at the feet of legends.
Yeah,
We
a
had a
big
lot of
legend
great
right
guests.
there.
We
Yeah.
had a lot of great guest stars there too. I mean, Bill Irwin, and of course Bill Irwin. He had done Elmo's World, for so long, but I didn't meet him until the 2003 Tonys, and ever since then we've become, when we see each other, we're good buddies. And he's just so kind whenever I see him in any capacity. If I'm seeing him in a show or if he comes on and does a thing with puppets, he's just so wonderful. Um, yeah, yeah, and I mean, then we had Ellie Kemper, who, fresh first season of Kimmy Schmidt, and she was just lovely. This was before I got to do the episode of Kimmy, and she really is everything that you see on screen.
Yeah. I
You want her
love
to be
Ellie Kemper.
you
Yeah.
want her to be your best friend, and she's absolutely willing to be your best friend. And I
Aw.
mean, my gosh, and we had, Joshua Bell and Josh Groban, who I had met before. And he's just couldn't be lovelier or funnier because he's done Sesame, um, and I had met him uh, on other occasions, and again, just I'd met him when he was, really young, and he just could not be nicer or warmer or lovelier, and such an amazing performer. I'm really looking forward to. I don't know if I'm going to be able to see it, but him doing Sweeney Todd this spring on Broadway is going to be pretty amazing.
If any of you listeners are gonna be in New York around that time, I don't think I will be, but for any of you listeners who are, check it
Yeah,
out.
yeah,
Josh Groban is quite the performer.
yeah. But
Mhm.
just thinking about, the nostalgia elements of it, I grew up with Julie Andrews, and I was really impacted by her voice growing up. I used to listen to the Mary Poppins soundtrack. I mean, I felt like I knew every diphthong of her voice. But, a voice on a record and a person are two very different things. So I'm glad that I got to know both.
Yeah, I totally know what you mean. Yeah.
Mm,
And it's the same with like you're hearing someone's voice on a TV show as
mhm,
well. And like I went to my very first ever HalCon, which is our
mhm,
Comic-Con here.
mhm.
And have you ever watched The Princess Bride?
Oh, sure.
Carrie Elwes was there.
Oh, wow.
And
By all accounts, he's an amazing person.
he really is. Like I go up, I did the photo session and the autograph session individually. You could do both, but it just
Mhm,
costs more money. So
mhm,
I went up for the photo session and he looks at me and goes, "Hi, what's your name?" I said, "Hi, I'm James." He says, "Nice to meet you, James." And
mhm.
without knowing what to say, I was like, "Oh my God, it's nice to meet one of my favorite actors in the friggin' world."
Ha!
And
Yeah.
he puts his hand on his heart and thanks me. And I went to get an autograph. I love The Princess Bride, but my favorite movie he's ever been in is Liar Liar with Jim Carrey.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
it's got everything a film needs:
Mhm,
comedy, heart,
mhm,
serious stuff, while also
mhm,
being incredibly slapstick, because it's a Jim
mhm.
Carrey movie.
Sure.
So I give him a Liar Liar picture for him to sign,
Mhm.
and he signs it The Claw.
Oh, it's been a long time since I've seen Liar Liar, so I don't
Mm,
remember the reference.
okay. That was an ongoing joke with Jim Carrey's character, and Carrie Elwes tried to imitate it very badly. So,
Ah, gotcha. Gotcha.
and
No, I probably saw it like the year after it came out, so that's a lot. That's 20 years ago.
fair enough. So
Yeah.
he gives me the picture and he looks at me and he says, "You're awesome." I said, "Thank you. I forgive you for that
Aw.
lie you just told."
Aw.
Yeah, great guy, so down to earth.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking of Princess Bride doing The Adventures of Elmo in Grouchland with Mandy Patinkin. I
Right.
mean,
I was going to ask about that. Yeah.
immediately, I trying to, beat around the bush and would you mind say just without blinking, you just said, "Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya." Right in my eyes, "You killed my father, prepare to die."
To die.
And I just all I could say was, "Yay!"
Mhm.
Yeah. Now he
Mhm.
knew. He knew.
Yeah, you could tell you
But
were
then
a
at the same
fan.
time, I'm sitting at lunch and he sits right down next to me and I did not expect that. So, yeah,
That's cool. That is
yeah,
really really cool. Yeah,
yeah.
there were a lot of actors that I saw. From didn't really have a lot of famous people. I think the most famous no offense if any of the stars of From are listening to this. I think the most famous person it had was Harold Perrineau. I think is his name.
Okay. I'm
I
not
don't.
familiar, but that doesn't
Okay,
mean anything.
okay. I think he's done a couple of famous movies, but I can't remember what ones. But I never saw him on the set.
Oh. Well, fame doesn't really mean jack squat, I have learned,
Yeah,
because the performer, I love so many character actors whose names nobody knows. There are all these
same.
people who I wish could do Sesame Street, but they might not be quote unquote well known enough.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I don't care about that. And that's the thing, we had famous people and not famous people come see us during Avenue Q, and I didn't fawn over anybody just because they were famous. I fawned over them if I was a fan. I fawned over them if I loved their work. Um, absolutely, but if it was someone that I didn't know and they were there just because they were famous, you know, you say hello, you're polite, and that's, you answer any questions they might have, or you have a
Mhm.
conversation or not, and get to know
Yeah,
that
like it.
person if
Yeah,
they
like it.
want them to get to know you, and
Yeah, like if you just walk by them on the way to a set and they're like, "Excuse me, what direction is this in?" So there's an interaction with them right there.
yeah, and
In
and
my
and the
mind.
thing is, you never know. I mean, my goodness, there's so many amazing actors right now who started out in very small roles,
Mhm.
and then become huge, you know. So just because you didn't work with anybody who's famous right now doesn't mean they may not become famous
Mhm.
or well known or well regarded. And yeah, I don't take
Mhm.
a lot of stock in how many followers someone has on Twitter. If I
Yeah.
like their work, I like their work. And so I'm sometimes a fan of people who are underrated, or I'm a fan before other people find them sometimes.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So, talking about Elmo and Grouchland, how did you get the role of Grizzy?
I auditioned several times for that.
Oh wow.
Well, that's a movie, but that's
Yeah,
a big deal.
fair,
That's not Sesame Street. That's a
fair
movie.
enough. Yeah.
I auditioned and somehow got it. It's really not much more interesting than that. I
Mm.
got lucky.
Mm. Did
That's
you
all I can
actually
say.
did you actually perform like on the Sesame Street set that they built for that, or were you mostly in the Grouchland set?
No, no, no. I performed everywhere because when I wasn't
Okay.
doing Grizzy, I was right-handing other characters
Okay.
or doing other Grouches, or like the socks in the laundromat, or a background Grouch, or a background something somewhere, or a bag of trash, or, something somewhere. So yeah, we were there on the Sesame set. That big day in the laundromat, I was one of the socks, and then I think was I right-handing Telly at one point? Um, I think I was right-handing Marty at one point, and oh, I mean, at one point I was holding up Super Grover. At one point I was holding up a. This is what happens. You hold up whatever puppet they throw you, and yeah, and that
Mm.
was one of the, also one of the pesties in Grouchland. But yeah, the Sesame set that they built um, it was interesting because that door was red. The door of 123 was red. It
Yeah,
was
it's usually green. Yeah.
well, and I think that, and I don't remember, maybe at that time they were talking about changing the color of the door on the Sesame set, but
Mhm.
and then this would have been the first example that I don't know. And then having the laundromat there, that was a bit of foreshadowing because I think I'm only about 10 years later we got the, laundromat on Sesame Street, and Yeah, it's always fun to see a representation of the street that's not really the street, because then we kind of had an around the corner that wasn't the around the corner. I think it
Mhm.
was the last thing Ruth Buzzy did with us. Um, yeah, it's always bigger because it's a movie.
Fair enough. Yeah.
It's a bigger soundstage, so the set took up a little more space than it does in New York.
Interesting. As I mentioned before, I recently just did a video tribute to Bob McGrath.
Hmm.
Bob was such a. I didn't know him as well as I know Roscoe Orman. Like he and I communicate on Facebook sometimes.
Yeah,
And I was very close with Emilio Delgado.
yeah.
But when I did hear from Bob online, the times that I did, I always could. I always could see himself and Bob being the same. Like the character and the human Bob were basically the same guy in my mind.
Well, Bob brought all of himself to what he did.
Hmm.
He
I,
brought
I
his
agree.
entire
Yeah.
self into the role. He brought his singing voice and his love of music, and he just brought his personality and his positivity and his grace, and he brought everything into it. He brought his heart and his love of the show into that character. So yeah, what you saw was pretty much Bob. Except
Hmm.
Bob could be, as all adults are, Bob could be a little, naughty like the rest of us. So it was always fun to see Bob's non-Bob side.
As a
Bob
person
has
or as a
lived
character?
either way. No, and Bob had quite a life. Bob was a Mitch Miller singer in the 60s, and that was a giant singing star in Japan, and he loved telling those stories. Um, yeah, he had an amazing life long before Sesame. And then Sesame was an entirely different thing, and he was just really wonderful. He was a wonderful person. So yeah,
Absolutely.
that all showed on screen. So yeah, if you sense that there was a similarity, it's just because he he brought himself to it,
Mm,
put it all out
absolutely.
there. Yeah.
Yeah. Another because Bob always had a really good singing voice, and did a lot of the classic Sesame Street songs. And you've done quite a few classic Sesame Street songs yourself. Like you've done versions of Sing and
Yeah, it's a long time ago. Can't blame
yeah.
him. But yeah.
That
We
makes
did
me.
people in your neighborhood.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that makes me wonder if you have any memories of Danny Epstein.
Oh, I loved Danny.
Hmm.
Yeah, Danny Epstein was really great. I didn't get to work with him a whole lot. I would mostly see him at other events.
Hmm.
Um, I did see him when Jerry Nelson recorded his album, um, Truro Dreaming or Truro Dreams. I can't remember. Oh my gosh,
Turo
it's longer.
Daydreams, I think.
Truro Daydreams. Thank
Yeah,
you.
we have it, and we listen
Yeah.
to it on trips a lot. Me and my grandfather.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So Danny played some percussion on that, and because a lot of the Sesame Band played on that, and I think that was one of the last times I saw Danny.
Hmm.
'Cause that would have been 2009 to 2010. Oh my goodness. And there were a lot of things I didn't know about Danny's career. And Danny had done a lot of stuff that he loved. He loved telling stories. And he was so talented. He was just great. He was cantankerous, but that's what made him great. And his daughter, Ivy Austin, such a great singer, and I've gotten to know her. I didn't get to work with her very much. I sang an Oinker Sisters thing very briefly with her once. I got to sing Oinker, no, twice. I got to sing for an Oinker Sister, on two different inserts. So I got to know her as a performer very, very briefly. But then, we'll see each other at legacy events or various events, and she's great. I did in 2011. There's a small theater in Manhattan called the York Theater, and they do a series of musicals called Musicals in Mufti, which means basically you're doing a musical kind of in street clothes, or approximation of costume, not really having sets. We have scripts in hand. We only do a handful of performances of them, and they like to do musicals that aren't done very much. And one of the musicals that I got to do with them was a show called The Mad Show, and it was basically Mad Magazine It was a bunch of little sketches. And it was a show that at the time featured a young Joanne Worley and a young Linda Lavin, and I don't remember who the men characters were. But on stage, they were accompanied by a pianist and a drummer. And originally off Broadway, that was Joe Raposo and Danny Epstein.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the entr'acte of that show was almost a little musical battle between the pianist and the percussionist. And I remember watching it from the wings because there were all sorts of whistles and slides. And Danny loved percussive toys, you know, like the and the zick and the woo and the slide whistles and the penny whistles and the cowbells and the blocks and the different hits and using percussion for comedy, kind of like Spike Jones, but he brought a lot of that into Sesame. If you listen to some of those early stings, you can really hear it. So even though I never met Joe Raposo, I could imagine Danny in that position playing that entr'acte. And I could also imagine him developing that. I'm sure that he was instrumental, no pun intended, in creating, you know, that arrangement, that percussion arrangement of where it was a cowbell and where it was a woodblock and where it was a slide whistle and where it was a snare rat-a-tat-tat. So and Ivy came to that and brought her sons, and that was really special because even though I'd, you know, that I felt like I had a connection to the show after that.
That's nice.
Yeah.
I didn't really think that much about how important Danny was to Sesame Street until Ivy actually came on this podcast. And
Oh yeah.
yeah, and then I started to bring up my friendship with Ivy, and I are still very, very close. And
Good.
oh yeah, she's the best. She's
He's
such a
fantastic.
sweet person.
Very talented. Yeah.
And I remember bringing up that friendship to a couple of guests on this show who knew her, and they were all like, "Oh my God, that's Danny Epstein's daughter." And at that point, I kind of thought, "Wow, you guys really, really liked Danny." So because of that, I tend to ask a lot of Sesame Street people if they got to know Danny at all. So that's why that came up.
Oh, I see. I see. No, Danny was, like I said, I didn't really get to work with him very much on set because that's really not what he did, but he was great and he was a character. You know, he was uniquely himself.
That's how Lou described him. He was
Really?
he had said he was very much like a character. He had told me that Danny
Yeah.
comes into Lou's office, plops down on the couch, and tells him the story about when he gets Sing from Joe Raposo for the first time.
Wow. See, that's Danny. I miss him. I really would have loved to have plucked more stories from Danny, but you know,
So
I'm glad I
moving
got the
on,
time with him that I did. Yes, moving along.
moving on from Sesame Street.
Yes.
What was it like to do the Wubbulous World of Dr. Seuss?
Oh, that was great fun. That was one of my first big shows where I got to do a lot of different characters. That was an amazing break for me. I was really lucky to get to audition for that. Seuss happened around the same time that Muppets Tonight was happening. And it happened during the Sesame Street season. So because I wasn't really vital to Sesame Street, and I obviously wasn't doing any Muppet stuff in LA at the time, that sort of gave me an opening to audition to begin with. I don't know that I would have even been asked to audition if it hadn't conflicted with those two other shows. So I was really, really lucky. And I loved it. I got to play a different character. Certainly in that first season, it was more of an anthology series where every week it would be about a different character. And I got to play so many different characters. It was exactly what I hoped working for the Muppets would be. Getting to just do something different all the time. And then to have some regular characters too. It was just a dream. It was really fun. And then it was also fun that in that first season, I got to write with my husband, Craig. I mean, I got to work with my husband, Craig Shemin, who was a writer on the show for the first season. And we got hired totally separately. You know, I was going under DeBruzzo and his name was Shemin, and we hadn't even been married a year yet. And so, yeah, people didn't know we were married until after we had both gotten the jobs.
And for all you listeners out there, Craig recently put out a book about Jim Henson's first ever series, Sam and Friends. I got it for Christmas. It's right in this room right now.
He was hoping I would plug it on your show. I hope you like it.
I haven't read it yet. It's been a busy week. I've been
Okay,
recording stuff, but
right?
I am really, really looking forward to reading it. I did skim it when I got it.
Uh-huh.
Craig, if you are listening, I am really, really excited to have a read through at this. And to all you listeners, buy it. It's so cool.
Well, he hopes you enjoy it, and I hope you enjoy it. It was definitely a labor of love for Craig.
I'll reach out to him when I'm done reading it.
Absolutely.
Hmm. But with the Wubbulous World of Dr. Seuss, that I feel like that would be a really interesting show to do because it combines two of the most creative people in the arts. Jim Henson, I mean,
Hmm.
I know it was long after Jim passed, but his Muppet characters and
Hmm.
Dr. Seuss, and that's amazing.
Yeah, and it's well documented that Jim and Theodore Geisel were going to meet at one point, and I think, and that didn't happen,
Oh,
unfortunately.
damn.
Yeah, and it would have been interesting to see what they cooked up together. I mean, there is a connecting factor between Dr. Seuss and Jim Henson, of course, is Michael Frith, who did some illustrations for some Dr. Seuss books early on at Random House, and of course, Chris Surf,
Hmm.
whose father, Bennett Cerf, was the founder of Random House, where Dr. Seuss's books were published.
Hmm.
So there is some connective tissue between the Muppet world and the Seuss world. Um, and I believe that at the time that Wubbulous World was happening, the Seuss estate was looking for people to adapt Dr. Seuss's work in one way, shape, or form. And so there were sort of submissions happening from several production companies, I believe. And I was not involved in the initial bid. They did a pitch reel. There was concept art. I think there was a very short video element to it. I was not involved in any of that. And, the show changed. It changed from the initial pitch to what the first season was. And then the first season morphed into the second season. The second season was very different from the first season in many ways. Um, but I think that it was all just a fun way to not only revisit classic Seuss characters, but to sort of create new characters that fit into the Seuss world. There were characters we could use. There were but we couldn't use any of the stories.
Hmm.
So we could use Yertle the Turtle, the character, but we couldn't use Yertle the Turtle, the story.
Okay.
Um, and that became a fun challenge because then it opened up a lot of things. So, for example, Fox and Mr. Knox of Fox and Socks sort of in the first season later on became this little comedy team, which was
Hmm.
fun and not necessarily what Dr. Seuss had maybe created them to be. But we got to really open up different possibilities for what those characters could be. And it was down and dirty and long, 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 long hours. Um, we were working with very early technology of doing computer generated backgrounds.
Hmm.
And I mean, the first season was 1996. So, I mean, it's right around the time that Toy Story was happening. And of course, we were doing it in real time. We didn't have the luxury of having it go through all of the rendering processes. So what you were able to get in real time now just looks so rudimentary. But it was cutting edge at the time. And in fact, in the mid 90s, computer technology was changing so rapidly that as soon as we got a computer system running, it was obsolete in a matter of months.
Hmm.
Um, but we had an amazing team. We were working very hard to come up with ways of playing with this technology. Um, Not just using it as backgrounds, but also, you could open a computer generated door and walk through it. So how do you do that? And sometimes that happened by using blue cutout cards that we would walk behind, and sometimes we would make a gesture to open a CG door that wasn't there. And then as soon as we cleared the door, they would pop in the door in the foreground so then we could walk into it behind it. It's hard to describe audio wise, but there were so many different techniques that we used to try to make these CG backgrounds into a CG set. So it wasn't just behind us. Sometimes we had real foreground pieces. Sometimes we had blue cards in front of us with CG pieces in front of us. It was definitely a challenge, but I was young and having fun playing and exploring, and thankfully we were shooting relatively close to where I lived and I didn't have a very long commute. I loved every second of it.
I bet.
Yeah.
And it also sounded pretty challenging to keep up with like the with having the puppets in like a computer background where it's all chroma keyed.
Yeah.
Which kind of makes me wonder about another series, Oobi, where you were just using rather than having a piece of cloth on your hand, you were just using your human hands for that. Like, and I've
Yeah.
talked to Noel and Cheryl and
Mhm.
Pam Arciero about this
Yeah.
before. Did you find it challenging to keep up with that because of the fact that you were using your human hand instead of a puppet?
Keep up with is not the right word I would use. It was just
Okay.
different. You know, we use it sort of came from the fact that when you first audition for Muppets, in order to sort of gauge whether you have the basic skills of eye focus and lip sync, they'll just put a pair of eyeballs on your bare hand just to see, you know, if you can count to 10 and say the alphabet and keep focus in a mirror and do basic lip sync before they put a puppet on your hand.
Mm.
And I believe Cheryl Henson, then when the Jim Henson Puppetry Festival was happening, then they sort of took that to make a poster. She and Marty Robinson created these posters to promote the festival that had various hand and eyeball configurations creating characters. And that led, and I don't remember, Josh Selig created the show, but he did it in conjunction with Marty Robinson. And I don't remember whether it was Marty who came to him, because Josh was also a Sesame Street writer, and said, you know, this is a really interesting look of having eyeballs on a bare hand. You can really, everyone's hand shape is different. You can really get a lot of great character stuff out of just this hand. I don't know quite how that came about, but I will say the only challenging thing was you don't have arm rods. So picking up a prop, we had to create our own rules. So if Uma picked up a tube of toothpaste, she just grabbed it with her mouth. But then there was another instance where Uma had to carry a suitcase and sing. So we just hooked the suitcase on my pinky finger and I sang. Using, you know, little things that you know how to do with a puppet. You just have to figure out new ways of doing with a bare hand. And some people found the bare hand thing, we would have, you know, occasionally people would come on for one shots and it would take them some time, like, really, it feels very, I can't use the tricks to hide, you know, but I loved it. Except when I had to do a show that Craig wrote, actually, where Uma had to be covered in mud for an entire show.
Oh,
And of course
jeez.
they had to achieve that with, you know, a combination of makeup, and I don't remember what they were able to use, but it, you know, she had to be dirty, visibly dirty throughout the episode because she didn't want to take a bath. And that's got to be on my hand all day.
Oh my
So,
God.
yeah, I guess at lunch I said I gotta wash my hands. I can't eat lunch like this, and so they had to reapply everything after lunch. We had to take lots of Polaroids to make sure that it matched. But
Hmm.
yeah, yeah.
That-
So, or there was a great episode where we all dressed up as dinosaurs and we had hand paint. And this, you know, I think in our second season we got a little bolder with costume pieces. Uma dressed up as a bunny for Halloween, so they had to, you know, stick little bunny teeth on my I think on my middle finger. It's just little things like that.
Hmm.
But it was fun. I enjoyed it. It was always a fun challenge to figure out, you know, the thinking gesture of using the thumb to scratch your head. I don't remember who came up with that, but that was fun.
Because the thumb would be like the puppet's jaw. So
Yeah, but then you'd scratch your, I mean, just making up new rules. You know, we could make up new rules.
amazing.
Or playing the piano. You just play the piano with your face.
Kind of like
Because
Don Music.
Yeah. But I mean, it was okay because in this world where we created this new reality, then that was okay. And that was fun. It was it was it was challenging in a different way, but I don't remember feeling hamstrung by it. I remember it being very freeing because when you can make up your own rules, as long as they make sense in one way, shape, or form, it was very collaborative. You know, it was all of us saying, well, how are we going to do this or this or this? And I found it to be very effective. And I had a lot of people commenting on Oobi um, when it was on. A lot of parents really enjoyed it, and that made me happy. I think that made me
Awesome.
really happy to know that that people were genuinely entertained by the show.
That's always a good feeling.
Oh yeah.
hmm And you've also done a lot of stuff with David Rudman's Spiffy Pictures Company, such as
Hmm.
Jack's Big Music Show, of course.
Yeah, I did a few episodes of that. I loved that.
Yeah. How big were those puppets? They look so small.
They're really small. They're fantastic. I didn't know what to expect. And I loved going in there like, I don't have to worry about arm rods. I don't have, wow, I can, oh, oh, it was great. And
Mm.
then, one of the episodes I did, I got to work with Jon Stewart.
I was just thinking about that one. Yeah.
Yeah, he played Brunk Steingruber of Groundhog News Network.
Well, I've always shared a lot of my creative stuff with you. You might get a big kick out of this. When I was in the sixth grade, we did a curriculum on Anne of Green Gables, which is
Hmm.
a do you know what Anne of Green Gables is?
Yes.
Okay. So we did a whole curriculum on that, and then when we were done reading the book, we actually had to act out what we knew. Well, we had to present what we knew about it. We could either do like act out a scene from the book, or we had to. It was all group stuff. So in partners, one person was an interviewer, and the other person was the author Lucy Maud Montgomery. And
Ah, okay.
I was 11 years old, and I had kind of just started watching The Daily Show,
Hmm.
and I wanted to impersonate Jon Stewart, interviewing Lucy Maud
Oh,
Montgomery.
that's fun.
And I
That's fun.
pitched that to the person I was partnered with, and he's like, "Yeah, I don't want to do that."
Uh-huh. I
Mm,
understand. Well, sorry you didn't get to do that, but
yeah. Hey, maybe one day.
maybe one day.
hmm Another Spiffy Pictures show you've worked on is Nature Cat, where not only you got to do voices, you did do voices for that, right?
I sure did.
Okay, and you also got to write for it as well.
I did. I did.
hmm
I had an idea for something based on actually an experience I had when I was volunteering. And
Oh.
yeah, I at the time I was volunteering at a food pantry, and I remember one of the jobs I was doing that day was bagging carrots, and the carrots that they had, those big industrial carrots, and a lot of them were cracked and just really ugly looking. And I thought, whenever we do nutrition, I've done so many nutrition puppet things, whether it's for Sesame or I did something for the USDA years ago. And whenever we do anything, we always present produce as being very perfect, like a Whole Foods commercial, just
hmm
perfect carrots that are lush with greenery. And I thought there are going to be kids who get these carrots and who think they're not going to be good, or they're going to think, oh, I don't, these are ugly and I don't want to eat them, or I don't get to have pretty carrots because I don't have the money to buy it. I didn't want them to feel bad about that, and I thought, there's got to be something that we can do, to show they're probably delicious if you cut them up and put them in dips or make them into carrot sticks or put them in soup or something. And so I thought, first I thought about trying to pitch something to Sesame, but we're having a new regime at the time, and they didn't really the new writers didn't really know me, and I didn't really feel I didn't have a track record. I hadn't really written anything for TV, and I'd already done a season of Nature Cat, and I just asked David. I knew Daisy had a garden, and I came up with an idea that maybe Squeaks was trying to grow carrots, and at the same time I would read online, people who try to garden, they grow the most interesting looking carrots. They do everything right, but they come out twisted, and some of them have little legs because it hits like a rock as it's growing and it splits, or it hits a um, the seeds are planted too close together, so sometimes the carrots entwine with each other, or it's bulbous. And I thought, well, what if Squeaks is trying to grow these carrots for a contest, and she's so disappointed that they're not perfect, but they taste fantastic. Um, and he was great. He said, well, write up an outline and we'll send it to our curriculum advisors. And they came up with a curriculum for it. And Adam Redman, who's the head writer and David's brother and the co-creator of Spiffy Pictures, he gave it the okay. And I got to write that first script, and I guess it went well enough. They had me write a few more Nature Cat scripts, and which I loved doing. I loved writing for those characters, and especially, what you get to write for Taran Killam and Bobby Moynihan and Kate McCucci and Kate McKinnon. Are you kidding me? What
That's
a what a
cool.
what a damn pleasure that was. The curriculum was very hard. Getting an outline, doing earth science curriculum is not easy, but it was a great challenge. And then that led to Adam Redman asking if I wanted to write some Donkey Hodie episodes. So I also got to
Mm,
write some Donkey Hodie episodes when
mm.
I started working on it.
I love Donkey Hodie. I know
Oh, I'm
I'm a
so
little
glad
bit
you
too
do.
old for
No
its
one's too
audience.
old. No one's too old for Donkey Hodie.
I think it's really, really, really cute.
We have a good time.
I bet you just finished up season 2, right?
No, we're still shooting
Oh,
season 3.
okay.
Oh,
Okay.
we'll be shooting season 2 for another 6 months. We're off and
Okay.
on. We're 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off in Chicago.
Okay.
So we still have a lot of episodes to do. We're having
Mm.
a good time.
I bet. I'm looking forward to seeing them.
Yeah, I don't think all the episodes from season 1 are out yet. I think
Oh,
there are a
wow.
few more. I think there are a few more left. I
Mm.
think there's some new ones airing now. So I think season 1 might be the last season 1 episodes might be airing around now.
Mm.
But the crew in Chicago is so wonderful. We have a really good time.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Uh, Another thing that you're well known for is the stage show Avenue Q, of course, which I mentioned in the intro, where you've
Hmm.
gotten to do. You were on the original Broadway production, I think. Is that
Yes,
correct?
yes,
Okay.
I was.
And I've heard you say in interviews before that Avenue Q was originally supposed to be a TV show.
It was. It was conceived to be a TV show. Um, yeah, it, you know,
So were you involved in it like from
I
day
was
one?
I got involved. They presented the initial concept for an quote unquote episode of the show, but
Hmm.
they did it like it was a musical theater reading. And so I got involved with it. Rick Lyon had recommended me for it. He built the puppets. He had met Jeff Marks and Bobby Lopez at the BMI songwriting workshop, and so yeah, he worked with them on the puppet characters, and knew that John Tartaglia and I had musical theater experience. But Rick thought I'd be too busy. And then by happenstance, Jeff and Bobby had also written a musical called Kermit, Prince of Denmark, which had won the Ed Kleban Award. They had presented that, and they were trying to sell it to the Jim Henson Company. And Craig was working for the Henson Company at the time. And Jeff and Bobby came to sort of pitch it to the company. And of course, Craig said, it was a musical version of Hamlet. And Craig said, in Hamlet, everyone dies, right? And well,
Yeah,
not in
that's
that. And they
that.
said, well, not in this version. This is, well, then what makes it Hamlet? And it was just clear that the higher ups weren't necessarily interested um, in this, presenting the Muppets in this particular way. And Craig said, if you really want to work with puppets, maybe you should create your own characters. And they said, well, we're actually working on this project right now. Um, and they played a couple of songs for Craig in the Henson offices, and they said, "Yeah, we're looking for a female puppeteer." And Craig said, "Well, my wife's a puppeteer," and he showed them some Wubbulous World of Dr. Seuss tapes, and so that's how I got involved with the first reading in May of 2000
Oh,
at the
wow.
York Theater, where I did the Mad Show
Nice.
11 years later. Um, yeah, and it was really obvious to all of us who were working on it that the songs really worked with an audience response. Um, I don't know that it would have worked as a television show. I think you would have had to have so much more content.
Yeah,
And
I
actually,
agree.
in what we did, half of the show, the first half of the show was sort of like an episode, and then the second half was sort of standalone pieces, like inserts, almost like Sesame Street. And they said, oh, admittedly, Jeff and Bobby won't have the time to write songs, all the songs for the show. So we sang songs by other composers. So one of the songs Kate Monster sang was a song that was pretty well known at the time in cabaret circles called Taylor the Latte Boy by Marcy Heisler and Zena Goldrich. And it's a song sung from a woman's point of view about the boy who works at Starbucks that she has a crush on because he gave her an extra shot of espresso. The triple latte was on him. Yeah, it was basically this, one-way love song, and it was very sweet. And Kate Monster sang that, and I also sang a song from Merrily We Roll Along called "Like It Was,"
Hmm.
and that song was basically the setup was that Kate was invited to her 10-year high school reunion. So she started singing, Nikki, why can't it be like it was? I want it the way that it was. And that was Stephen Sondheim, of course, and they got permission from Mr. Sondheim to use that song in the reading.
Wow.
That moment in Like It was sort of the springboard that became I Wish I Could Go Back to College. And the emotions in Taylor the Latte Boy sort of was the springboard for Mixtape. It was interesting. It was interesting to see the things that stayed and the things that didn't work and the way characters were portrayed. Um, and I had never really been involved with developing a musical before. I didn't know what was going to happen. If there was a reading and I was available, I said yes. I could have been replaced at any point along the way. I was lucky that I wasn't. And I never could have dreamed when we did the off-Broadway production at the Vineyard Theater. Again, that's going to be 20 years ago this spring, in 2003, that I had no idea that it would go to Broadway. I had no idea it would run for 9 years on Broadway. I didn't know any of that. I just was, if someone asks me to perform, I say yes.
That's
And
always the way to be.
goes back to that very first thing you asked. So yeah.
Yeah. I saw some really impressive stage puppetry the other day, actually. My sister and her friend and I went to go see Elf the Musical
Oh yeah,
yeah, they have it here at the Neptune Theater in
fun.
Halifax, and
Hmm.
the opening number that introduces Buddy the Elf was
Hmm.
the other elves were all puppets,
Oh
and
fun.
the actors had like elf shoes and socks on them, and then the puppets were just like
Right.
attached to them. It
Fun.
was so cool.
Oh, that's great.
It was amazing.
Yeah, it's fun to see the way people imagine different ways of staging those numbers.
Yeah, because like I did a puppet workshop. I think I mentioned to you that I did a puppet workshop with Neptune Theater a few years ago,
Hmm.
and it was co-done by Neptune Theater and Mermaid Theater, which is in Windsor, Windsor,
Okay.
Nova Scotia, which is a little bit farther away. But they
Hmm.
do they do stage puppets in a very interesting way. And so what they had us do was like take an everyday object that you have with you. Like I think I used my water bottle. Okay, now animate it.
Oh wow.
That's what they try to do. So right
Yeah,
away we were just making stuff out of sticks and pipe cleaners and
sure.
feathers, and we're making shows out of it. I actually have a video of it that I'll try to find because
Fun.
it was so wicked
Yeah,
the way that they did
that's
it.
great. That's great you got to experience that. That's
Yeah.
wonderful.
Mm.
Oh, I feel like I need to plug Helpsters. The second half of season 3 just premiered on Apple TV Plus.
Oh, I think I
And
saw that on Instagram. That's right. You do Cody on Helpsters.
yeah, I needed to mention it because it's something that a lot of us worked really hard on, and you have a
Mm.
fellow Canadian who worked on it, Ingrid Hansen. So
Yes.
uh,
That's
yeah, and
correct.
she does an amazing job as Hart. And then you've got, my dear pals Martin Robinson and Tim Lagasse and Jen Barnhart. I love them all, and we
Mm.
did really good stuff. Really good stuff.
So let's wrap it up with a fan question. This comes from Anthony Thompson.
Okay.
And Anthony wants to know, how much fun was it to do the Sesame Street 80s music video mashup?
Oh, that was fun. I had a good time on that. I think I came up with some of those puns. I think I came up with the hey now, your
Uh,
dream is over. Oh, because I grew up in I had the 80s with the music. That was one of my favorite times.
mhm.
Yeah, I haven't, it's so funny. I haven't seen it cut together in a really long time, maybe since we shot it, and that's a few years ago now. That was
Mm.
pre-COVID. So, oh my gosh. Um, yeah, I'm trying to remember some of the other things, but I was really proud of some of those slipping in some of those song titles.
So were those like improvised?
Not all improvised. We clear a lot of things. Like
Okay.
I'll say, "Can I zhuzh this line? Can I say this? Can I say this?"
Hmm.
I'm not. No one is that good to just add those. Some things you can add in the moment as far as reactions, but as far as a line like that, no. That was one of those things where I said, "Hey, what if Prairie says this? Can we 80s this up a little bit more?" It's just a way to really pack in the 80s.
Mm. If they did videos like that about the 90s and the 2000s, I can just see all of the puns. I mean, it would be the hardest thing to not come up with puns for the 90s
I'm
songs.
sure. I'm sure.
Yeah, because I
But
mean,
we
they'd want it that way.
That's exactly right. See, and I'm all old, so the 80s stuff was just perfect for me and many of my friends who were working on it too. Us Generation Xers, we had a good time.
Well, Stephanie, thank you very much for joining me for the first ever nostalgia talk of the year. Is there anything you want to say to finish?
No, I just want to say I'm really flattered that people are nostalgic for any of the stuff that I've done. That's wild to me to think that people remember what I did with any sort of fondness. So I'm really glad that people have enjoyed what I've done, but it's unfathomable to think that someone who's in their 20s is talking about work of mine that they saw when they were very, very young. It's a lot to wrap your little head around. I hope you understand what I'm talking about someday.
Absolutely.
I couldn't have fathomed it when I was your age, but it's nice. It's a
I,
nice place to be.
I bet. Well, to all you listeners out there, this is the beginning. This is the first nostalgia talk of 2023. There's lots of stuff coming. So I will see you soon. In the meantime, peace.
Bye.